Okay, so we're going to get into class here in a second, but I'm going to derail my own class, which is not a good thing to do in the beginning. But I just want to tell you a story, because sometimes we get bogged down in the stuff that we're doing right now, which are, apologetics and all of these details about how to talk with people and handle sometimes more complicated arguments. And we don't want to forget the forest for the trees. So we're driving here tonight, and Eve, her car seat's like right behind me, and she stuffs everything in that car seat. It's like a repository for the entire world. And so she pulls out a coloring page from a previous Bible class, and so she's looking at that, and she remembers it's Hezekiah. So she knows what Hezekiah looks like, which is great, because I don't. But she gets to talking about it, but it's when Hezekiah found out he was going to die. And so Jenna is talking with her and trying to cover some of those little kid lessons. We'll use it as a teachable moment. But she talks about, well, why is Hezekiah sad? And Eve says, because he's going to die. And she said, well, what did Hezekiah do? And Eve didn't remember. And so Jenna said, well, remember, he asked God. And then he did one other thing. He asked God, but he did one other thing. And he remembered the other thing he did was he cried. And so then Jenna said, do you ever cry sometimes? You go, yeah. Well, you can ask God for things when you cry too. And I'm just sitting there driving, and I'm thinking, I'm going to cover hermeneutics, and that's the whole thing right there. Like, forget about all the other stuff, right? Sometimes we just got to remember, like, sometimes life gets hard, and you can cry, and you can ask God. And then it's quiet in the car for like 10 seconds. And I hear Eve say, I just want to hug Jesus. No, I try not to be that dad who's like, hey, let me tell you about all my kids and how much I love them. But I'll tell you, that, like, you talk about out of the mouth of babes, right? And that for us to be like children, if each of us could just get in our heart that all we want to do is, I just want to get to heaven and hug Jesus. Anyways, I just thought it was really cool, and I wanted to share it. So now we get to go to grown-up stuff, which is way more boring than that. Okay, so 2 Peter chapter 1. In 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16, so we're in 2 Peter on Sundays right now. Peter makes a point. He says, we do not follow cleverly devised tales. That passage that we're covering on Sundays dovetails really nicely with what we're looking at in tonight's class in the discussion of, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Because the whole Bible, all of it, comes down to that one point. If Jesus rose from the dead, everything matters about the New Testament. It's the most important document ever, because it's the power of God unto salvation to those who believe in Jesus. If he didn't really rise from the dead, just throw the thing away. I mean, just file it in the round file on your way out the door. It's not worth your time if Jesus didn't raise from the dead. So Peter makes the point, really emphasizes this idea. We are not following some sort of tale. And here's the thing that historians know, and the previous classes and chapters in the book that we've covered have led up to this point, but there's three basic ideas that historians know about the New Testament. One, they know it's not a legend. Okay, so a legend is like the story of Hercules, or something, Aesop's fables, or something like that. Some sort of mythological pretend story that maybe you get some lessons from, but nobody actually believes it's real, right? Zeus and Hermes and those sorts of things. It's not a legend. We know that. Historians know there's too many details that are historically accurate. It lines up with history and the facts of the world at that time. The other thing that we know is it's not a deception. Whether you agree with the writers of the New Testament or not, it does not have the marks of a deceptive lie. If they are telling something that isn't true, they believed that lie themselves. Do you understand the difference between that? Like, even if historians say we don't agree with the New Testament, they don't believe it was written as a deceptive book. The people who wrote it, the apostles and prophets, were not trying to lie to people because they don't do the things that liars do. They didn't embellish. They point out their own flaws. They were accurate about details that didn't matter, but it historically lines up. So it's not a deception. So historians don't look at the New Testament as a legend, real people. They don't look at it as deception, and they also don't look at it as something that was embellished. They run into this a lot of times with history written by kings. If you're a king and you write history about yourself and the wars you fought, you tend to embellish, right? You want to make yourself look a little bit better than the other kings who went before you. The New Testament isn't written in that way. Once again, did the apostles make themselves look good? They don't. A lot of times they're the ones that you're face-palming over in the New Testament, going, I can't believe you did that. It's not embellished to make them look better. And so along those lines of it being not a legend, not a deception, and not embellishment, that's kind of agreed upon across the board. And so what we're looking at is, let's find some common ground. And we're going to talk about whether Jesus was raised from the dead, whether it really happened as an actual event in history. What we want to do is find some common ground with the skeptics. So the historians, even those who are skeptical and not Christians themselves, do not view the New Testament as a legend. They don't view it as deceptive, meaning that the people who wrote it were not trying to trick anybody. And it's not embellished. Now, that does not necessarily mean it's true. It just means it's not those three things. So there are historians who agree on all those three things, but they go, yeah, but it's not, it's not from God. What we want to do is say, well, actually, if it's not those three things, it has to be from God. Because if it's not a legend, and it's not deception, and it's not embellished, the only option is for it to be not a cleverly devised tale, but actually something from God. And so that's the point that we're going to go at in this class. First of all, did everybody get a copy of these 12 facts? If you did not, got a couple here. Yeah, thank you. We'll need those in a couple of minutes. I'll go through them on the slides, but you're going to want a copy because you guys are going to teach me tonight. So, since all of the New Testament pivots around the empty tomb, that's where we want to stake our claim and our battle. And it's sometimes when you are talking with people, you can get caught off in the weeds about things that don't matter too much or are secondary issues. Like if you're talking with somebody and they get really wrapped up in the what the book of Revelation is about, you can spend hours talking about what the book of Revelation is about and still not get to the point that matters, right? We want to get right to the point that matters. We want to get to that empty tomb. Was Jesus really raised from the dead? Did he really die? Was the tomb empty on the third day? And is he alive now? There's a guy by the name of Gary Habermas, and he looks very unhappy in this photo, which is, by the way, why I picked it. I saw that photo. He had plenty of really happy photos, and I picked that one because it just made me laugh. So if you ever wonder what makes Scott just tickles his funny bone, that's what does it. He just looks unhappy, but he it's probably because of what his job is. He has what I would consider to be a very boring job. He got this idea at some point that he was going to take every scholar across the whole spectrum, from a very conservative mindset towards the Bible that somebody who says everything in the Bible is absolutely true and divinely inspired, all the way to the much more liberal view, progressive view that it is fabrication, the whole idea of Jesus being divinity. And gather all of those things together and then cross-reference all of them and see if you could find common ground that everybody across the whole spectrum of historians. Now, we're not talking about everybody across the spectrum who believes everything. We're talking about professional historians who are across the spectrum from very conservative to very progressive. What do they, is there anything that they all agree on about the New Testament and the facts about Jesus? And it turns out he found out there were 12. And these are kind of the magical 12 things. Because what it does is it gives us some common ground to begin a discussion. If everybody in the room who has any sort of experience as a historian says these 12 things are true, even though they disagree about a lot of other things, we can at least go, okay, here's a starting point, and we can begin to have a discussion about whether or not Jesus was really raised from the dead based off of those 12 facts that we know. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so here's the 12 facts in pretty quick succession. 1, Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. Jesus is a real person. He is a real historical figure. Whether or not he's the Son of God, they debate back and forth. But he did really live in the first century and was killed by Roman crucifixion. He was buried most likely in a private tomb. Third thing is that soon after that happened, the disciples that had been following him became very discouraged, despondent, and gave up hope. This is agreed upon across the spectrum. The fourth thing is Jesus' tomb was then found empty very soon after his interment in it. So why it was found empty, there's lots of debate over. Right? They don't all agree that it was found empty because God raised him from the dead. But they do all agree that it was found empty, and that's a historical fact that we have to deal with. Why it was found empty, we debate, but that it was is agreed upon, which should be interesting to us as Christians because sometimes we're kind of told the opposite. Well, I mean, how do you even know there was a tomb? Well, the historians all agree there was a tomb, he really was crucified, and it really was found empty very soon after he was placed in it. Fifth thing is the disciples had experiences that they believed were actual appearances of the risen Jesus. And you notice the language there in the fifth one. The disciples had experience that they believed were actual appearances of the risen Jesus. Not every historian says that they actually did see the risen Jesus, but they do agree that they all had experiences. So this is, once again, we're not talking about what the Bible says. Right? This is what historians say. The sixth, due to these experiences that they had, the disciples' lives were thoroughly transformed. They were even willing to die for their beliefs. So we begin to list what were the things that changed about the lives of the disciples, and in particular the apostles, because of the fact that they believed they had seen Jesus rise from the dead. What are some things that changed? Okay, so you have several different things that Scott's brought up. One, there's an occupational change. They leave their jobs. They switch from being fishermen to being preachers. Very different occupations. I can't catch a fish to save my life. Go out with my kids. They all catch fish. I don't. Fishing for me my entire life has been sitting somewhere holding a rod. Switched occupations entirely. They stand up to people that they used to be submissive to. The Sanhedrin was in charge of the Jewish world. these are Jewish men. They now find themselves standing up to those people. And as the sixth item points out, they were even willing to die for their belief. History, extra-biblical history, tells us that it is likely that every or almost every apostle died a martyr's death. The only one that really is debated over that is the last one to live, John. John might have died from old age. So, huge changes to their life, and historians agree with that. The seventh thing is the proclamation of the resurrection took place very early, from the beginning of church history. So this is not something that was later on added in. It's not like we added the resurrection account into Christianity 200 years later. That, by the way, is something that people will use as an argument, is they'll say, well, really, how do you even know that the early Christians believed that Jesus had been raised from the dead or taught that? Maybe that's just stuff that came in later on, and they'll use that telephone game argument. Has anybody ever heard the telephone game argument where you tell one person, then tell the next person, next person, next person? It changes as you go. Well, here's the problem with that argument. We have the old manuscripts. And it's not like, as you look at the manuscripts through the ages, we have some that are very, very old, some that are very old, some that are old, and some that are less old. And we look at all of them, and guess what they all talk about? I'll talk about the resurrection. They all talk about the idea that Jesus died, was buried, and was raised on the third day. So the resurrection proclamation part of the gospel was not something added into the mix later on. It was always a part of the gospel message. The eighth thing is that the disciples' public testimony and preaching of the resurrection, it began in a certain physical location. It began in Jerusalem. The reason that that's particularly interesting is, well, let me ask you, why would that be interesting? That that's the location where the preaching began. That's where all the Jews came together. What? That's where it was prophesied. Yes, so in the Old Testament, you can go and say that's where they said it was going to happen. Well, it might be another reason that it would be a big deal that it was there. Huge point. Right? I don't know how many people could hear Reggie, but the Jewish religion is a 1,500-year religion. And Jerusalem is the center of that religious. If you're going to be an Orthodox, deeply pious, devout Jew to a 1,500-year-old religion, you're going to be in Jerusalem. And it's from there that all that transformation and change happened. There's another aspect about it being in Jerusalem too that we sometimes forget about, which is that's where all the stuff happened. It's not like Jesus was crucified and buried, 16 states over. He was crucified just outside the city walls of Jerusalem. The tomb was just outside the city walls of Jerusalem. And so when the preaching of the empty tomb and the resurrection is happening in Jerusalem, anybody who would argue over it, what do they have to do if they want to verify the resurrection story? Just go to where the body would be, right? You just go to where the tomb would be. For us, it's a big, the idea of going to Israel for us as Americans is a big thing. Like, you hear so-and-so, they went over to Israel and they saw all the different sites. That was not a big deal to the first Christians. They're like, yeah, I went to Calvary. 200 yards that way. That was their world. That was where everything happened. And we know, historians agree, that's where Christianity began. Ninth thing, the resurrection was the central message of the gospel in the first century. Not only was it always taught, but it was central to Christianity. When Paul was on trial before the Sanhedrin and he saw the Pharisees and the Sadducees in the room, the thing that he cried out is, he says, I am on trial for the hope and the resurrection. From the very beginning, that was the pivotal thing to Christianity. It was not just that Jesus was the Son of God, but that he had been raised from the dead. 10th thing, Sunday was the primary day for gathering and worship. As Reggie pointed out, for 1,500 years they've been Jews. What was the primary day for gathering and worship if you're a Jew? Saturday, the Sabbath. So all of a sudden, 1,500 years of that's gone out the window, and they're now gathering on Sunday, the first day of the week, as their primary time of gathering and worship. Why might that have anything to do with our conversation about the empty tomb? Why would the fact that they met on Sundays and made that change have anything to do with the empty tomb? That's it. The day that Jesus arose from the empty tomb was the first day of the week. And historians agree that that idea being associated with the Sunday worship was connected. The 11th thing, historians agree, and this is an interesting one, James, the brother of Jesus, was a skeptic and was converted after seeing the risen Jesus. Or, to put it more technically, the historians agree that James, the brother of Jesus, was a skeptic and was converted after his experience where he believed he saw the risen Jesus. Can I be technical about that there? But historians agree to that James was a real guy. He had really lived, and he really was an early leader in the church in Jerusalem, which is an interesting fact because it was his brother who is proclaimed as the Christ. And then the last one is another conversion story that is agreed upon by historians is that just a few years later, Saul of Tarsus, who we typically refer to as Paul, became a Christian due to his belief that he had seen the risen Jesus as well. So, across the whole spectrum of historians, people who do this stuff for a living, they go, yeah, we'll agree to these 12. We won't agree to everything. We're not all saying Jesus is the Son of God or that he was really raised from the dead, but we'll agree to these 12 facts. So this becomes our common ground. Does anybody have any questions or does that make sense? Okay, so now here's where it changes. Considering those 12 facts, we've got some arguments that are typically raised against the resurrection of Jesus. Typical skeptics' arguments that come up where people say, how do you know that Jesus was really raised from the dead? Couldn't it have been that? And then fill in the blank. Well, considering these 12 facts, we're going to deal with those. So that's why you have that handout. And so I'm going to take these 12 off of the slides, and now you're going to teach the class. And it's going to be a really boring class if you don't. Because I'm pretty good at just waiting people out. How would you answer with those 12 facts things like, well, couldn't the resurrection simply have been a hallucination? Jesus wasn't really raised from the dead, but they hallucinated. They had an experience. And I'm going to get a little bit more technical to how this comes up because I've had people do this with me before. They said, well, this happens all the time. Somebody is in grief. They've lost a loved one. And they think they see them in the grocery store. They think they hear their voice because there's just such sorrow. And it's a very common experience with mourning. Couldn't it have just been that? Couldn't it simply be that they had that kind of experience and Jesus wasn't really raised from the dead, but they were just really grieving and it's a hallucination or a mourning experience? Okay. Yeah, is that what you were going to say too? Too many witnesses. Okay, so the number one argument to that is it's not just one person doing it, right? There's a lot of people. Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, so the first sighting, yeah, it didn't begin with them saying, oh, Jesus. It starts out with her not realizing who it is and then having this kind of being shaken by him and saying, hey, look, don't you know who I am? So that doesn't match the hallucination idea. Yeah. Yeah, because even if, do you get that? That even if you say, okay, they're hallucinating, the empty tomb is not a hallucination. That's a physical location and there's no body. So yeah, so there's another element to it. So you see how even with just the 12 facts that we have, that every historian in the peer-reviewed world across the spectrum agrees on, this falls apart. That doesn't make sense. Any other ways you handle that? Yeah. Great point. Yeah. So hallucination, not only would it have to be, there's too many, but hallucinations aren't the same with everybody. Yeah. So you mean all of these people did it, and they all had it at the same time? That doesn't make sense. Yeah. Be that guy. I like that guy. That's right. Okay. Okay. So you're right. Can you remember like a documented case? Because I've read about this too, but I'm trying to remember of an example. Right. All in the same. Right. Okay. So C brings up there is technically a case of like a mass hallucination, but and correct me if I'm wrong on this, my understanding of it is when those happen, they're always a singularity event, like all the people at the same time in the same spot. Is that fair to say? Okay, great. Yes, did you have something? That's it. Yes, okay, so we handle the mass hallucination, which I like that you're that guy, so thank you. Because we don't want to just set up straw men and knock them down so we feel good about ourselves and go, yay! And then we go out there and then you get pummeled. Like, that's not what we're going for, right? Somebody will bring that sort of stuff up. But it's not a single event where everybody was at one spot all at the same time. They were all at different spots and having different times. And as you pointed out, Paul's even years later. The other problem with the hallucination thing is, no, go right ahead. Correct. Yeah, so you have corroborative evidence from non-believers. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Anybody have any else? Yeah, yes, and then yes. I'll give it to Reggie first. Yeah. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. 40 days of hallucination doesn't make any sense. That doesn't hold up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. What we do have documented as mass hallucination does not match what we see documented in the New Testament. Yeah, absolutely. Thomas wouldn't believe to his eyes. So you have the skeptic, which kind of goes with the mass hallucination thing. Like, he's not buying into the, what's the word you use, but that just suggestion, right? He's not buying into it, and you don't hallucinate. It's, I'm going to touch it with my own hands. So I'm gonna see for myself. Okay, next one. Could they have just gone to the wrong empty tomb? How do you handle this? Yeah. Yeah, too many people, right? There's just too many people. I could get lost going somewhere and end up at the wrong tomb, but is everybody going to get lost? Reggie. Yep. And the burial clothes are in there. Okay, so they go in there, and it's not technically an empty tomb, is it? It's empty of a person, which is the important part. But there were burial clothes in there. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, very wealthy people were the few who could have something like that. So it's not like this was a dime a dozen. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we have the owner too. We have the owner of the tomb saying, "Yeah, I can tell you that's my tomb." Um, yeah, yes, and I've got a whole row of people. This is great. You guys are awesome. Okay, I'm going to go with Phil because he's an elder and he's my boss. So, um, okay, so it's not like just some random tomb, right? We've got it sealed, and enemies who don't want that to be emptied are watching it. Yes, and then yes. Yep. Right. So the enemies knew too, and they would have taken advantage of that. Did you still have something, Bruna? There's a guard outside. Okay, so we're hitting on that same idea. I'm trying to watch out of my peripheral vision too, and not kind of. Anybody have anything else I'm missing? Okay, so we get the idea, right? So it's not gonna. That doesn't hold water because it wasn't just one guy who said, "I found the empty tomb." You have a whole slew of people, a whole bunch of people, and not all of them friends. Okay, next one. Could Jesus have only appeared to die? Okay, how do we handle this one? This is sometimes, by the way, referred to as the swoon theory, which is such a dumb name in my opinion, because swooning sounds like some Victorian woman going, oh, like. But that's what you'll sometimes hear that term, so I fear I should tell you. Yes. Yeah. Good point. Mm-hmm. Yep. So Jesus died. How did he die? Roman crucifixion. Do Romans not let people kind of die? No, that was their job to make sure they fully died. Anything else? Yeah. Yep. So I forget the statistic. I think it's about 75 pounds of things that were used to embalm Jesus's body. You don't do that on a live person and expect them to be alive on the other side of it. So, yeah. And then, after the embalming and everything, can we at least agree that even if he only appeared to die on the cross, he was still pretty close to dead by the time he's in the tomb, he's dead enough to embalm. How's he get out? Like this idea that he just says, glad I tricked everybody, and just saunters out. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, right? He would have bled to death in the tomb. It wouldn't have worked. Yeah. Yep. It doesn't match the facts we know, and as Steve succinctly put, fact one, Jesus died, right? So, yeah. Okay, we good on that one? We good to move to the next one? Okay. Could the disciples have just stolen the body? I like this one because it's the oldest one. We know it's the oldest one because the Bible records that was the argument that was used, right? So, how do we handle it? Okay. Yeah, so for them to go and steal the body shows a certain level of courage and bravery and Navy SEALism, and, that's not what we've seen in these guys up to this point. Yeah, so they fled when they went to crucify him, so good point. Yeah. Yep. They're the best equipped military out there, and you get extra credit points for saying throwing hands. Yes, so you're not gonna take on this guard. It's just not gonna happen. Yeah. Right. It is statistically impossible. It doesn't match. And the fact that they were not, and the history tells us they weren't punished, right? So that would have seemed fishy to even people of the first century. So they came in and stole the body. Well, why didn't any of the guards get punished? Yeah. Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yes. And then yes. Uh-huh. They were all executed. Yeah. Great point. So we have other historical events that show what would be the normal punishment. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the burial clothes are there. Thank you for catching such an odd detail. But yes, it's true. Why do we just leave the burial clothes there? Okay, so yeah, that's another one. Yeah. It was it the whole thing, or was it was just the head covering part, wasn't it? Oh, can somebody check that? Oh, that's right, because the head cloth was separate, and it would have been all of the shrouding. So you're saying the clothes underneath the shroud would have still been there. Okay, I understand. Yes, okay. Yeah, okay. You don't want that to use up your comment? Okay, yeah. Fair. Uh-huh. Yeah, they don't go all Navy SEAL and throw hands. Perfect. Also, along those lines, if they stole the body, what do we know happens to them from the facts later on? They die the death of martyrs. If they stole the body, do they die martyr's death to defend that? Doesn't make sense. Okay. Any other comments? We good? Okay. Could a substitute have died in place of Jesus? Yeah, so there's just like somebody, he's a lookalike. Yes. Yes. What? Stunt double. I absolutely love this class right now. This is like my favorite right now, just so y'all know. Okay, one, good point. Who's volunteering, right? At some point you go, not him, not him. Yeah, okay, yes. Oh, chain of custody. Okay, so we have a chain of custody from that moment forward. We know who it is, okay? Any other things we'd add to that? Yes. Oh, pulling out the mom card. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So his own mother is there at the cross, and moms know they're babies. And he says things that the stunt double wouldn't say. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hide. Yes. So every story. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. You're right. You just need one, right? We're looking at a whole bunch of others, but you're absolutely right. You just need the one. Right. Yes. So everybody agrees Jesus died on the cross. And to use that as well, the disciples, how did they feel about that? What did it say? They were bereaved, despondent, and lost all hope. Did they believe the real guy died there? Yes, right? And so friend and enemy alike said, this is the guy. Right? So it doesn't match the idea that somebody just got swapped out. And once again, it's Roman crucifixion, as Matt pointed out. You got that chain of custody through that whole process of Roman crucifixion. Rome doesn't accidentally just crucify the wrong guy. Okay. I don't have time for any more. So I will leave those there and we'll call it. But does anybody have any other comments before we shut down with a prayer? Okay.